In the quiet hum of a late summer evening in 2025, the world paused to mourn the passing of Richard Gere, a cinematic icon whose charm and talent had captivated audiences for decades. The news of his departure sent ripples through Hollywood and beyond, but it was the revelation of his final act, A Fortune Left Behind, that stirred the hearts of fans to tears. Known for his roles in timeless films like Pretty Woman, An Officer and a Gentleman, and Chicago, Gere had built a legacy not just on screen, but in the lives he touched with his philanthropy and quiet generosity. His estate, valued at an estimated $250 million, was not merely a number, but a testament to a life lived with purpose. And the way he chose to distribute it spoke volumes about the man behind the silver screen. Fans, accustomed to his on-screen charisma, were unprepared for the depth of his off-screen compassion, revealed in a will that prioritized causes over personal gain, leaving a legacy that felt both grand and intimately personal. Richard Gere's journey to stardom was never a straight line. Born in Philadelphia in 1949, he was a child of modest means, raised by Methodist parents who instilled in him a sense of discipline and empathy. His early days as a struggling actor in New York, taking on stage roles and small parts, were marked by a relentless drive that eventually landed him in Hollywood's spotlight. By the time Pretty Woman hit theaters in 1990, Gere was a household name, his smoldering gaze and easy smile making him a heartthrob for a generation. Yet, behind the scenes, he was more than a leading man. His deep involvement with Tibetan, Buddhism, and human rights advocacy, particularly for the Tibetan cause, shaped his worldview. Friends and colleagues often spoke of his quiet moments, meditating before a shoot, or slipping away to meet with activists. It was this duality, the movie star and the monk-like humanitarian, that made the news of his fortune's allocation so profoundly moving. The details of Gere's will, made public shortly after his passing, were a masterclass in intentionality. The bulk of his fortune was directed not to family, though his wife, Alejandra Silva, and their children were comfortably provided for, but to a network of charities and causes he had championed for decades. The Gere Foundation, established in the 1990s to support Tibetan refugees and promote human rights, received a staggering $100 million. This single act ensured the foundation's work could continue for generations, funding schools, healthcare, initiatives, and cultural preservation efforts for Tibetans in exile. Fans who had followed Gere's career were stunned, not by the amount, but by the realization that the man who played a wealthy businessman in Pretty Woman had lived a life far removed from material excess. Social media buzzed with stories of his kindness, anonymous donations to struggling theater companies, quiet visits to orphanages in India, and his unwavering support for the Dalai Lama. One fan tweeted, "He didn't just act like a hero, he was one. This hurts, but it's beautiful." Beyond the Gere Foundation, his will outlined bequests that touched on global issues close to his heart. Environmental conservation, a passion he shared with his wife, saw $50 million allocated to organizations fighting climate change and protecting endangered ecosystems. Gere had been vocal about the planet's fragility, often speaking at small gatherings about the need for collective action. His donations to groups like the Rainforest Foundation and Greenpeace were not just financial, but symbolic, a call to action for others to follow. Another $30 million was directed to AIDS research and support for marginalized communities, a nod to his early advocacy during the 1980s AIDS crisis when stigma was rampant. These choices painted a picture of a man who saw wealth as a tool for change, not a status symbol. Fans, reading the news, found themselves weeping not just for his loss, but for the clarity of his moral compass, a rarity in an industry often criticized for its excesses. The emotional weight of Gere's legacy was amplified by the personal stories that emerged. Colleagues shared memories of his generosity on set, covering catering costs for underpaid crew members, mentoring young actors, and refusing to let fame inflate his ego. Julia Roberts, his Pretty Woman co-star, released a statement describing him as a gentleman in every sense, who gave more than he ever took. Fans echoed her sentiments, flooding online forums with tributes. One viral post recounted how Gere had paid for a stranger's hospital bill during a chance encounter in New York, a story corroborated by a nurse who witnessed it. These anecdotes, paired with the enormity of his charitable bequests, left fans grappling with a bittersweet truth. The world had lost a man whose heart was as big as his talent. "I'm crying because he's gone," one fan wrote, "but also because he showed us how to live." Gere's family, though not the primary focus of his will, was not forgotten. Alejandra Silva, his wife of 7 years, inherited their Bedford, New York estate, a sprawling property where they had raised their 2 young sons. The estate, valued at $20 million, was a sanctuary for Gere, a place where he could retreat from Hollywood's glare. Sources close to the family said Silva was not surprised by the will's emphasis on philanthropy. It was, after all, a shared value. Their children, Alexander and James, were provided trust funds, but Gere ensured they were modest by Hollywood standards, reflecting his belief in earning one's way. His eldest son, Homer, from his second marriage, received a portion of the estate and a collection of personal items, including Gere's cherished Buddhist prayer beads. These personal touches, small against the backdrop of his charitable largesse, moved fans deeply, humanizing a man who seemed almost mythic in his generosity. The reaction from the public was overwhelming, a tidal wave of grief and gratitude. On platforms like X, hashtags like Namsh Richard Gere Legacy and Thank You Richard trended for days. Fans shared clips from his films, but more poignantly, they shared stories of how his advocacy had touched their lives. A Tibetan refugee posted a heartfelt video tearfully thanking Gere for funding the school where she learned to read. An environmental activist credited Gere's donations for saving a stretch of rainforest that was home to an endangered species. These stories, woven together, created a tapestry of impact that few celebrities could match. Critics, too, took note. A New York Times editorial praised Gere as a rare star who used his platform not for self-aggrandizement, but for the voiceless, while Variety called his will a script more compelling than any he ever performed. Yet, for all the admiration, there was an undercurrent of sadness in how Gere's fortune was discussed. Fans couldn't help but feel the world had been robbed of more time with him. At 76, his death was not entirely unexpected. He had faced health challenges in recent years, but it was no less devastating. Rumors swirled about the cause, with some outlets speculating about a private battle with illness. Though his family remained silent on the matter, what was clear was that Gere had approached his final years with the same grace he brought to his roles. He had spent his last months quietly, dividing his time between his family and his causes, even hosting a small fundraiser for Tibetan monks just weeks before his passing. This image of a man at peace, giving until the end, brought fans to tears as much as the fortune he left behind. The ripple effects of Gere's will are likely to be felt for decades. The Gere Foundation, now flush with funds, announced plans to expand its programs, including a new scholarship for Tibetan youth studying abroad. Environmental groups began outlining projects to honor Gere's commitment, from reforestation efforts in South America to clean energy initiatives in Asia. AIDS organizations, too, spoke of scaling up their work, inspired by Gere's early courage in addressing the crisis. For fans, these developments were a small comfort, a reminder that Gere's spirit would live on through the lives he changed. Yet, the grief remained raw. "He gave us so much," one fan posted, "and we didn't even know the half of it. Until now." In the end, Richard Gere's fortune was more than money. It was a reflection of a life lived with intention, a legacy that transcended fame. His films would continue to be watched, his characters quoted, but it was his off-screen choices that left the deepest mark. Fans cried not just for the loss of a beloved actor, but for the beauty of a man who saw wealth as a means to heal, not to hoard. As tributes poured in, from candlelit vigils outside his New York home to quiet prayers in Tibetan monasteries, the world seemed to agree. Richard Gere had left behind a fortune, yes, but also a lesson in what it means to truly live.